So my name is Joe Sackman. I'm with Long Island Activists, and I sit on the executive committee of New York Progressive Action Network, Our Revolution. And tonight I am co-hosting with Melanie DeRigo. And before we go any further, I'm just giving you a little background about NYPAN and Our Revolution. So I want to welcome you all to the Invest on New York Town Hall. And briefly, like I said, I'm going to tell you about our organizations that are hosting tonight. That's New York Progressive Action Network and Our Revolution. Both organizations evolved from the efforts to elect Bernie Sanders to the presidency. Last year, NYPAN and Our Revolution officially joined forces to fight for progressive changes that we need. Bernie Sanders made his campaign about not me, us. This ideal is at the foundation of both of our organizations. With the combined experience and political power of dozens of chapters statewide, we are joined in the fight to elect progressive candidates and advocate for progressive issues like universal health care, the New York Health Act here in New York, a Green New Deal, and legislation that puts people over profits, and policies that work towards a more just and equitable society. Tonight, NYPAN and Our Revolution will host our coalition partners from Invest Our New York. Dana and Erica will provide a background on the Invest Our New York campaign and updates about what is happening this session and beyond. And following that presentation, Michael Kink from Strong Economy for All will provide us with some important information about the budget and reports on the revenue Ione efforts have brought in so far. We ask you that you hold your questions to the end of the presentation, where there will be an opportunity for Q&A. And now I'm going to hand it off to Melanie DeRigo, who worked with me last year on Long Island to educate and advocate for the campaign. Melanie is a fellow Long Island activist member, an organizer, a mom of three. Well, that's most important. She's out there. And a congressional candidate for District 3. So, Melanie, if you could take it away from there.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Boy, do we have a treat for you all. We're so grateful to have Erica, Vladimer, and our very own Dana here, who will be presenting to you in just a few moments. I just wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the Invest in Our New York campaign and how Joe and I got involved and how we ultimately met. Dana, of course, Erica's been at the helm of this for a while, and we've known her separately, but it's really just been a beautiful coalition process. Joe and I joined the Invest in Our New York coalition as two separate organizers at first, not really representing any groups, to learn more about the budget. What is this budget and how does it work? And how can we make it work for New Yorkers? Fast forward to today, where there are over 200 groups that are part of this statewide coalition. Joe and I had this vision that we could do two things on Long Island. One, we could create budget literacy by hosting teach-ins and teaching folks around the district about how our budget is structured and how it's used and how it works. And two, get folks on board to advocate for new legislation that would raise revenue and rebalance the tax structure. And that's how we met Dana, who is deeply involved in that work. And we are so excited to be working alongside her and the rest of the coalition. I'll just, quickly, I think Joe and I probably did over 20 teach-ins across Long Island, meeting with different progressive groups like Indivisible, Long Island Progressive Coalition. We met with Transition Town Port Washington. We met with Democratic clubs. Together We Will Long Island, and many, many more of our partners in coalition that we build regularly with on social justice issues. So without further ado, I would love to turn it over to the main event and introduce you all to Dana and Erica, who will take us through the Invest in Our New York presentation. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Melanie and Joe. It's really amazing to be here today. I see some familiar faces from last year, which is incredible, and some new people as well. I started volunteering for Invest in Our New York last year, as Melanie said, through Bend the Arc, which is my home organization on Long Island. I'm originally from Wantagh, so I grew up grew up on Long Island most of my life, although now I'm based in Brooklyn, and it's been amazing to see the advocacy and the grassroots effort around this campaign on Long Island and statewide last year, and we really want to build on that momentum. So I'm just going to start off by telling you about our wins from last year and then kind of go on to what we are facing this year. So as Melanie said, we are a true statewide coalition. Besides having 200 advocacy organizations, we also have dozens of volunteer organizations like the ones that you all are part of that really worked tirelessly last year to win these bills. So we were projected to raise $4.3 billion in new revenue. One of our main wins was we won $4.2 billion in foundation aid to schools. This was a huge win that advocates fought for decades that the state owed public schools, and we finally won it last year. A second major win was we got $2 billion for an excluded workers fund. So this money went to workers who, despite losing their jobs for the pandemic, did not receive unemployment benefit. And this is the first of its kind in the US, and now other states are following suit to create this kind of fund for excluded workers in their states. We also won $900 million for working and middle class tax relief, and half of that actually went to property tax relief, which I know is a huge problem across the state, especially on Long Island. And this is a start to us working on
Gotta love technology.
Oh no, have we lost her?
Hey, Dana, if you can hear us, maybe could you try going off camera, and because we cannot, you're frozen at the moment. Universal broadband is right.
Oh, she's there. I see her.
Did you lose me?
We did.
Oh, no. Okay. What's the last thing you heard?
We heard about half of the $900 million going towards property tax relief and how important this is for Long Island, but that it is really only a start.
Okay, perfect. So this is something we will, again, be focusing on this year because we know how important it is for our homeowners. So Mike King will go into this more later, but although we were projected to raise $4.3 billion, we actually raised $10 billion more than we expected. So this means two things. One, billionaires and the ultra wealthy did not leave when we taxed them. This was the main kind of fighting point that the media and people against our campaign had, and it didn't happen. And Robert Mujica, who is the director of the New York State budget and also a Republican, has supported this. He's come out and said no one has left. These bills have raised billions of dollars of revenue. And because it raised more than we projected, it means that the wealthy grew even wealthier than we thought. And this is during a pandemic. So this happened because of grassroots organizing. It did not happen because of the Long Island Five, even though immediately after the state budget was passed, they claimed this as their victory, but it was people like you on the ground making almost 1 million calls, fighting every day for almost 4 months straight. It was a true grassroots effort, and we can do that again this year. Next. So Joanza Williams, who is Director of Organizing for Vocal and also on our steering committee, said that we need to stop perceiving these crises as fixed realities of our society. We know that the Democratic Party has a tendency to fall back on what they think is practical, and they never fight beyond that. They never fight to fix the true needs of our communities. And last year, if we were taught anything, change is possible. We aimed really high. We made some incredible wins, and we're aiming high this year because we know we can. We know that we can win again. Next. So unfortunately, vast needs do remain in our state. These are some of the things that we'll be working on, which Erica will go more in depth on. But I really want everyone to take a moment and think about what you would like to see in your community. If you stepped outside of your door and looked around to your neighbors on your street, what do you need to make your life easier? What kind of investment do you need on a really, really local level? And I want you to keep this vision in your head during the whole presentation, and then we'll come back to it in a bit. Next. So unfortunately, even though we had these incredible wins, we have a long way to go. Despite living in one of the wealthiest states, we also live in the most unequal state in the country. And we know that the wealth lands in the pockets of a very small percentage of New Yorkers. And this didn't happen overnight. This graph shows 40 years of decades of disinvestment. So from 1979, most income growth had gone to the top 20%, especially the top 0.01%, while the middle and low income households, their income essentially remains stagnant. And even though this stops at 2017, we know that the trend continues. So in 2021, US corporate after-tax profits hit a record high of 2.5 trillion in the third quarter of last year. So this, further enriched wealthy executives and shareholders. And despite this, they used pandemic-related supply chain issues to jack up prices for essential needs like gasoline and food. So again, the burden is falling on the backs of everyday New Yorkers. Next. So the last graph was talking about just income. This is talking about overall wealth. And when we're talking about the super wealthy, we mean billionaires, people that have an extraordinary amount of wealth that they don't even know what to do with it. So I'll walk you through this graph. If we have 100 people that represent the US and $100 represents our wealth, $40 goes to just one guy. It is very purposeful that this guy is white and he's middle-aged. So almost half of the country's wealth goes to one guy. Then $40 goes to 9 more. It's divided to $4.44. And the other 90 folks, the majority of the US population, has to split the remaining $20, and they each get 22 cents. When you lay it out this way, it is extremely stark. And when you factor in race, ethnicity, gender, marital status, the wealth gap is even greater. So in 2019, the median wealth of families headed by women was about half of that of families headed by men. And families headed by Black and Latina women have only 5 to 10 cents for every dollar held by families headed by white men. And if you go even further, 1 in 5 families and about half of Black families with children are headed by single mothers. So when you look at this data, these implications of economic insecurity is vast for children, families, our future generations. But it really does not have to be this way. And we have this incredible graph. I will go through it slowly, but this is a quick, this is just an example of how the percentage of income claimed by the top 1% has declined from 1915 to 1975, which has reversed the extreme inequality of the Gilded Age. So 3 things happened. Government raised taxes. They then invested that money in communities, and they created policies to protect everyday people. So if you start with taxes, you'll see the first bubble. It says top tax rates were raised over 75%. Another one says the Eisenhower administration had the wealthiest individuals pay a top tax rate of 91% on income over what would be $1.7 million today. So what that means is if someone makes $1.8 million, 100,000 of that was taxed at 91%. This created billions of dollars in new revenue, and it went towards Congress passing wage agreements during World War II. Social Security was created in 1935, Medicare in 1965. There was unemployment insurance, agricultural subsidies, and these really became key investments that reduced inequality in our country and our state. And then, like I said, they created policies that protected the people. So stronger minimum wage provisions were created, antitrust regulations, and support for unions. And there's just one fact I want to share. If you take away anything from tonight, I want you to remember this. The Economic Policy Institute estimated that had these trends continued, the poverty rate would have dropped to 0 by the year 2000. If these trends continue, the poverty rate would have dropped to 0 by the year 2000. So change is possible. It is a policy choice, but unfortunately, it did not stay this way. So now this graph is showing you the opposite. Basically, corporations and the rich use their power and influence to win tax cuts and deregulation, and they use it under the guise of trickle-down economics, which we know does not benefit everyday people. So as there were tax cuts and things like that, the income share of the 1% increased, as well as inequality. And while all this shows what happened on a national level, it was also happening at the state level as well. So in New York, there was a stock transfer tax that was introduced in 1905. The New York Times claimed that the financial industry would up and leave and go to New Jersey, and that no significant revenue would be gained. Within months, then the paper had to report that the tax was unexpectedly productive. No one left. Wall Street stayed in New York. The ultra wealthy stayed put. And this resulted in billions of dollars that helped fund Cooney and SUNY systems. It helped fund Mitchell-Lama housing, world-class public transit, if you can even imagine that, and an internationally admired public health system. So New York was really thriving because of this stock transfer tax. But then in 1981, billionaires strong-armed Albany, similar to what they did on a national level, and they rebated this tax, and it's still rebated to this day. So funds that were available were cut, public investment declined, and inequality shot right back up. And this is also one of the reasons why we have a deeply regressive property tax and sales tax. So again, the burden went on the backs of everyday people. And there's one other thing that really influenced the resurgence of inequality, and that was white people's reactions to the civil rights movement. So the civil rights movement really widened the circle of public beneficiaries, and it diminished white people's commitment to the very idea of public good. So the 1963 March on Washington really showed white Americans that Black activists were demanding the same economic guarantees that they had and the same support from the government. So if you backtrack 13 years prior, in the 1950s, 70% of white Americans agreed with the idea that the government should guarantee a job for anyone who wants one and guarantee a minimum standard of living. Then 10 to 13 years later, we have the March on Washington. White support for those ideas nosedived to 35% and has remained just as low ever since. So even though it is clear corporate power and money played a role in this, it is also very clear that racial resentment did as well and was a key uncredited actor to our economic downfall. So this was a policy choice. Change is definitely possible, and I will pass it off to Erica.
Thanks, Dana. And so this is the part, what Dana just said in her last sentence, is what I'm really going to focus on. Inequality is a policy choice. When a government insufficiently invests in critical services and infrastructure, we see this gap, this inequality gap, widen in real time. These are conscious disinvestments that our policymakers are making. And these are disinvestments in our communities. And that means it shows up in our everyday lives, literally every single day. And so that's why Dana had asked you in the beginning of this presentation to think about the things that you would like to see invested in your community when you step outside your door, because these are conscious policy decisions that are made. So I'm going to give you a few examples of how we see this inequality show up every single day. And the first one, which I think is just becoming more and more apparent that we cannot ignore, and if you've been ignoring it since now, we're not going to let you ignore it moving forward, but it's the climate crisis. So here in New York State, the Climate Leadership and Community Protections Act became law in 2019. And this was groundbreaking, right? In theory, it really was groundbreaking. It was talked about across the nation. But here's the issue. It was never funded. We laid all these mandates out and decisions that we were going to make to try and combat the climate crisis here in New York State, and we didn't put a single dollar behind it. We could have, if our policymakers made the choice to pass what we call the Climate and Community Investment Act, but that failed to pass last year. So there is now a Climate Can't Wait campaign. It's about 30 different environmental groups. I believe it's actually more. And they've basically pivoted to this push of investing $15 billion, the same amount that would have been raised through the Climate and Community Investment Act. And this will essentially be a down payment on this groundbreaking national, forward-thinking legislation. And so this slide, shows the important ways that this money can be spent. And look, if $15 billion sounds like a lot, I want to remind you of something else that Dana said earlier in our presentation. We have a state budget that is over $200 billion. This year alone, the governor is proposing $216 billion. So when you put that into context, $15 billion is really only 7% of our full budget. And expert consensus is that we only have 8 years to avert an environmental disaster. And so we need to make these investments now, because that will actually save us money in the long run. So I'm going to throw some numbers and facts at you just to show you that this isn't just rhetoric that we're saying, that we're going to save money in the long run. The New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA for short, estimates net benefits in the range of $80 to $150 billion if we make these investments now in combating the climate crisis. We will also see public health benefits to the tune of about $160 to $170 billion if we invest in combating the climate crisis. That is also on top of all of that, an estimated $260 billion by mitigating damage via emissions reductions. Healthcare is another prime example that we see show up in our everyday lives and what a disinvestment harms us as regular New Yorkers. Decades of disinvestment and reliance on largely private systems has led to things like hospital closures and accelerating costs. And this does have a disproportionate impact on low income and Black and brown New Yorkers. But we're also seeing stagnant wages. And because of these stagnant wages, our healthcare system is struggling to maintain safe staffing levels. We know that there was a law that was just passed that just keeps getting kicked down the road to be implemented in terms of safe staffing levels. And a staggering 45% of care workers who are essential, right, for the safety and well-being of older New Yorkers and those with disabilities, they themselves are living in or near poverty. And that is going to continue to create major shortages in healthcare. And just to think about this a little bit more zoomed out, over 50% of New Yorkers are experiencing at least one of the following healthcare challenges. They're either uninsured, delaying or foregoing healthcare due to cost, or struggling to pay their medical bills. What about childcare? This is something that we saw show up so prevalently during the COVID crisis, and we are still seeing that now. right? People are struggling to gain access to childcare, even before the pandemic, but the pandemic really shined a huge light on people who were able to access it before. But in the first month, we saw that our federal policymakers made a choice to invest in families by expanding a childcare tax credit, which lifted households of 3 million kids out of poverty. It's a 25% decrease, and that is huge. But that relief was temporary. They decided not to re-up that tax credit, and so it's incomplete. And so we know here in New York, truly caring for our children means that we need increased government subsidy to bring down the costs that can approach about 1/3 of New York's median household income, which is around $68,000. And if you think about what we say, the definition of things like affordable housing, right? They say that is up to 1/3 of your income. So if you're paying 2/3 of your income to have a safe roof over your head and to send your child to childcare, think about all the other basic needs that families are struggling to reach and to have. We also know that we need greater assistance to low-income households. Right now in New York State, that is only available to families who are making less than $43,000 a year. But we know, again, the median income is $68,000 a year. So there's a whole gap of folks who need that support. And again, just like we saw in the healthcare industry, we have a staffing shortage, a staffing crisis in the childcare industry, because we need to provide better pay to retain workers and eliminate those staffing shortages and therefore closures, as opposed to keeping these people that we are asking to support us in raising our children, keeping them at poverty wages and living in poverty themselves. But we also need improved public transportation. Right now, access to daycare, right? If you live in let's say rural New York, you might not have a daycare down the street that you can just quickly drop your child off to before you have to go to work. You don't have access to the same public transportation as you might for public school. And so we need to increase access to that. We need to make better investments. And I know I just mentioned housing. We know that housing is due for a major renovation. New York's property taxes are some of the highest rates in the nation. And that's because they're the main way that our counties and localities can try and fund needs like road maintenance and municipal services and fire departments and school funding. And they have to do that because our state and our federal government are not sufficiently investing in these types of services. So the municipalities, the counties are trying to make up for that by increasing property taxes. But we know that these high costs are not translating into equitable and effective delivery of services. We also know that 50% of New York renters have housing costs that are considered above the affordability threshold. And again, that affordability threshold is 1/3 of your income. So 50% of New Yorkers are paying more than 1/3 of their income just to keep a safe roof over their head and the heads of their families. And in the past year, rents have increased disproportionately for lower income renters. And rents also rose at a higher rate for low income tenants of color. And that is more in comparison to low income white tenants as well. And then homelessness. In one of the wealthiest states in the country, 92,000 people are facing homelessness. And when you couple this with the fact that 1 in 4 low income renters are behind on their rent due to the pandemic, it's clear that this crisis is going to get worse, because if, let's say, we can wave a magic wand and suddenly we can, put a roof over people's heads if they're homeless right now, next month, right, March 1st, there are going to be other families who are facing eviction. So we want you to imagine a state where we can all prosper. What would it look like for you to step out of your front door and see the services that you need to meet your basic needs, for your neighbors to thrive instead of just barely surviving? In a $200 billion budget, we can meaningfully invest in these things. We can invest $15 billion in climate resilience and $10 billion in childcare and education, $15 billion in housing, $4 billion for the Excluded Workers Fund, that is a leading national program, and $4 billion in healthcare. we can do all of this if we make the right policy decisions. And here's how we do that. Well, first, we have to invest in our communities. Direct, sustained investments in peoples and communities create real economic opportunity. So think about investments in climate resilience, which will create good green jobs and help the communities that are most impacted by climate disasters. We also need to end wasteful subsidies. And this is, in particular, there's one called the 421A program. This is essentially a tax break that real estate developers get because they make these promises of providing affordable housing in these massive buildings that they create. But in 2020, New York City alone missed out on $1.6 billion in revenue as a result of the 421A program. And we also need to think about reimagining and redefining economic development. Now, look, I think someone like Kink could probably do a 2-hour teach-in on the economic development program we have here in New York, and I'm not going to pretend to know all the details, but top level, here's what you need to know. There's about $10 billion in corporate giveaways that have been provided through this regional economic development council program and contest that Cuomo created. And that goes to these corporations that, again, make these huge promises of bringing jobs and investing back into the communities that they build their warehouses in. And when they don't meet those promises, when they break those promises, we don't see a dime back from the grants that we give them. I don't know about you, but I can think of a million things right now that $10 billion can be better spent on than giant corporate giveaways. And look, it's not a main focus this year, but we know that there is money that was left on the table last year, and we do need to continue to tax the wealthy. And so we do want to build on what we won last year, but we also really want to focus on making sure the money that we do have, this additional $10 billion in state revenue, the federal funding that's coming in, let's make sure that is truly invested in real New Yorkers. And we want you to come take these next steps with us. There's a lot of different ways you can do that, and Dana is going to throw some links in the chat. One of the ways you can do that is sign up your group to be part of the Ione Coalition. If you're not part of NYPAN, right? If you're here with a different organization, you can sign up and send 2 representatives to meetings that we have every Saturday morning. You could just spend your Saturday morning with us. Don't worry, we all look like Saturday morning style, especially me with my giant cup of iced coffee. But that is where we really start organizing and start to continue to harness the power and the collective grassroots activism that we were able to harness last year and succeed on. We also want you to start scheduling appointments to meet with your assembly members and your senators, and do that with your legislators, right? Who are you a constituent of? You can sign up. There's this bit.ly. Again, Dana will put that in the chat for you. And if you sign up there and let us know who your legislators are, if you don't feel comfortable, if you don't feel totally prepared, the coalition, Ione Coalition, is ready to back you. We can provide someone to go with you to the meeting. We can help provide information and literature before you attend the meeting, or we can even do practice meetings. I've done that with a few groups. It's actually kind of fun. And if you're really focused on different policy areas, there's other things you can do. You can send emails to your state reps to support universal childcare. Right now, the governor has not put that in her budget. She's expanding the tax credit, but we know that there's some great proposals for universal childcare. You can also join a climate coalition lobbying meeting with your legislators. So this is where they're really making that hard ask for commitments of that $15 billion down payment on climate resilience. And you can also do outreach like this that Dana and I did to other local groups, and you can go outside of activist organizations. Think about your PTAs or your church groups or your temples, right? They should be educated. Budget literacy, Melanie talked about this and how she and Joe really took this on for Long Island. Let's continue to do that and showing folks how we can invest in real New Yorkers if our policymakers choose to make that decision. And one thing that, we really want is to make sure that we're tracking this money. What are the local issues that you care about? Who controls those investments, and how can they help? Make sure you hold them accountable by speaking up. happen. One of the ways that is we are in an election year. Hold your elected officials accountable. Ask them if they support these types of investments. And if they don't, ask them why. Make sure that they know that your vote is dependent on them investing in real New Yorkers. And I'm going to stop there.
All right, great. Thank you, Dana and Erica. It's always a lot of information, and that's what's good. You know, I think when we first started with Ione, it started with budget justice, and it built from there, and it was just learning about the budget. And if you don't know about the New York State budget, it is a monster, and a lot of people came together to learn about it, understand it, and even I see Livy Mann on here. Right, Livy's great. She was part of Budget Justice University, which was to help educate our legislators on what the budget is. Okay, some of them and some of their staff needed a primer, and we know this is a lot of information, and it's great that everyone's come out so far to hear this and to learn about it, because it's really important. Because what happens in the budget really defines what happens in our state. So again, thanks, Dana and Erica. And now, before we go on, I want to introduce Michael Kink from Strong Economy for All. I'm going to give a quick bio on him, and he's going to give some updates about Tom DiNapoli's report on the budget and where some of our revenue, what's been going on there. So Michael Kink is the executive director of the Strong Economy for All Coalition, a labor community coalition that works in New York and around the country on economic, racial, and social justice and income inequality, and helps lead the Wall Street accountability, those two words that don't seem to fit together, and financialization project at the Center for Popular Democracy. He is a public interest attorney, organizer, and activist for 30 years with 30 years of experience on campaigns for economic, racial, and social justice. So I'm gonna ask Mike to unmute, and he's gonna give us an update. If I can find him. There we go.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Dana. Thanks, Erica. Thanks, everybody who's here. And, you know, I think my short portion of the remarks are going to be that we're on the right track. You know, Controller DiNapoli issued a report last week that showed that tax revenues had been expected to raise, to go up about 10% from the Invest in Our New York taxes on wealthy New Yorkers and big corporations. They went up 30%. They were expected to raise $4.2 billion. Now tax revenues are up over $10 billion. So we have the money we need to make these investments to create a state where we can all prosper. But we need to go back in this year and fight those fights, because Kathy Hochul is not Cuomo, but a lot of the things that she's proposed are very Cuomo-esque, right? So we have $10 billion in increased taxes. She wants to take half of that and not spend it. Just set it aside, right? And we talked about the housing needs and the childcare needs and the job needs. And she wants to not spend that money that you all work so hard to raise. The other half, she wants to put into more corporate subsidies and more tax breaks. So if we want money for universal childcare, if we want money for universal health care, if we want to build great 21st century social housing all over the state, if we want to significantly bring down people's property taxes instead of just giving them a little election year sprinkle, we need those long-term deep investments. The other one or two things I'll mention, and I'll post a few links in the chat, is the economic development scandals that Erica mentioned are ripe for the picking. That's another $10 billion in expenditures, $4.5 billion at the state level, $5.5 billion at the local level. And you've seen it, right? You've seen Amazon warehouses get multi-million-dollar subsidies from county IDAs. You know, Amazon builds its warehouse facilities based on a corporate logarithm. X amount of customers, Y amount of geography, Z amount of warehouses. They might be one side of one highway or another side of another highway, but the region is going to get these warehouses. There's no reason that we need double or triple digit $1 million subsidies for Amazon warehouses. Hochul signed off on a $4 million per job subsidy to a money-losing startup company up in Genesee County. Plug Power is based in Albany. They're getting $250 million to create 68 jobs. That's money that could create thousands of jobs if we put it into frontline services and childcare, if we drove it into our communities for decent pay for home care and social services workers. These are fights we need to have, because if we don't join this fight, they're going to take it all for the wealthy and the big corporations. We proved last year that if you jump in, you can make it happen, and we need to do it again this year. And then next year, we need to keep it going until we really turn this state around and move it in the directions of the charts that Dana showed, right? It's a choice. We can bring poverty down. We can bring homelessness down. We can build prosperity for the working class and the middle class. We got to do it together, but we can't do it without fighting. If we don't jump in the fight, they're going to take this away from us. Thanks for the time, and I'll hang around for the Q&A.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. All right, so I'm gonna ask a question. So, how are things going in Albany with legislators getting behind, all this? The 6 bills we had last year, I know they're still live. How do we feel about what where our legislators stand? I know on Long Island, we did a lot of work to basically kind of just keep them quiet so they wouldn't stand against it. But we did have, Fred Thiel in the assembly that was supportive. We had assembly member Salages, she was supportive. I believe Phil Ramos as well in the assembly, but in the Senate, we weren't that lucky until, like others have said, when we did raise the revenue and the money was there for the schools, they all came out saying, I voted for this. And it was the hard work of the grassroots organizations and the coalition that got us there. So, what's an update from Albany? Where do we stand?
I don't know if Kink wants to jump in. He might have more insider intel that he can share. But I will say, look, I do think this year is a little different because, as Joe mentioned, last year we had 6 bills, right? They had bill numbers, they had bill sponsors. We could push legislators to specifically sign on and fight for these bills to be put into the budget. This year, it's a little different, right? We don't have actual specific bills. Yes, there are some that like we can point to, like Senator Brisport does have a universal childcare bill, but these are much more like budget asks. And so what we're really focused on right now is making sure that people are meeting with their legislators to say, we need you behind this, and getting that commitment. And what that looks like is that being in their one house budgets. So I'm not going to go into my whole budget teaching here, but basically right now what we're waiting for is both the Senate and the Assembly are going to put out ultimately their budget proposals, right? They're going to say that they accept or reject certain proposals that the governor put out in her budget. They might make their own new proposals. And so we want to make sure that whatever they are accepting or rejecting or modifying is in line with these budget asks. We will have a sign-on letter that we are sending soon that you all can sign on as organizations, and we'll make sure once that is finalized that it gets sent out, and it really lays out what these specific budget asks are. But they are things like, again, $10 billion in childcare, $15 billion in climate, resiliency and sustainability. And so these conversations are just really happening. This is kind of going to be like last year where, we're running now, maybe we're doing like a fast jog, and then those one house budgets come out and it's going to be a sprint. because that's when negotiations happen. I think, you know, at this point, we do see a lot of legislators who are deciding that they're not going to run for office again. And so it's hard to engage them, especially out on Long Island, where we're seeing this both on the state and on the federal level. And so that's tough, right? But it is an election year. And so I think like that is really important too, is to make sure that we're engaging them. This is a long-term fight, right? Make sure they know that it's not just what you fight for in the budget and then campaigning and voting for you. It is literally tied together. If they want this support, that they're going to have to truly work with us, with real New Yorkers, to invest in us. And so I know a lot of those conversations are still happening. Kink, I don't know if you have anything else that you can share.
Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say, you know, our 6 bills are still live. You know, they were introduced for this session of the legislature. There are aspects of the bills that will raise even more money than they did last year, right? If we apply the high-end income taxes to unrealized capital gains of billionaires, the Jessica Ramos billionaires tax is going to raise even more. But I do think Invest in Our New York made this tactical decision to focus again on investments, as Erica said, the needs of communities, which we lead with, and to open up a front on the corporate subsidies. The appetite of the legislature to pass a big tax increase 2 years in a row, maybe not quite there. We do think that next year, the 6 Ione bills or the roadmap to a total transformation of the New York State tax system. Straightforward improvements in progressivity on high incomes, big corporations, and extreme wealth. And it's a roadmap over time. That's why I think all of us are saying fight this year and be ready to fight next year. We got to go fight. We got to win more elections. We got to get more better lawmakers in, and we got to keep moving it forward. So we're there, we're fighting, we're all together. We need all of you guys to do it too.
Any other questions? Jeremy.
Sorry, so no question, but I do kind of want to give some background at how Ione went last year. So just so you get an idea of the work it took to get the 10 billion in revenue that we got this year. So you heard tonight about the very clear needs in healthcare, childcare, and housing. And we also heard about the disparities in how the rich and the middle class are taxed. So this is like an obvious solution to us, right? You know, you hear this presentation, you think, all right, surely my Democratic elected will support this. So inevitably, one by one, we would reach out to our electeds. I met with all these senators in Long Island, Democrat senators in Long Island, for example. We would present this information, and I even had specific information, income-related information to their district. 95% of your constituents would not be affected by any tax increases. Maybe the top 3% would be see increases that are negligible for someone who is a multimillionaire. You know what their first response was? Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't want to, you know, tax the rich. I'm kind of concerned about them. You know, what if, you know, are they really rich? Is a multimillionaire rich? And that, you know, what is obvious to us as, you know, middle-class people is not obvious to your senators and assemblymen, even if they're Democrats. It took us, you know, doing extensive field campaigns, doing repeated lobby meetings to pressure our Democrat senators to either co-sponsor the bill or to shut up and not stand in the way. So that's the amount of work that this takes. So, you know, if tonight made sense to you, please, you know, sign up, you know, be prepared to commit your organization to doing you know, further work for this.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Jeremy was instrumental in a lot of the phone banking we did and meetings. Me and Jeremy and I and multiple, Dana, you know, we had so many meetings on Long Island about this. So it is, you know, but that's how it gets done. That's how we got what we got done. And, you know, and that's how we have to keep moving forward. And this is, you know, it is a great strategic evolution of Invest in New York to do what we're doing now, you know, to go down this route, because we need the funds, but we need to know how to spend those funds, that revenue, and not just let somebody like Governor Hochul take the surplus and give it back to the rich and ultra wealthy and corporations. So It really needs to come back into our communities. That's what our representatives are supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be bringing our tax dollars back to work for us. And if they're not doing that, then what are they doing? So yeah, this year is a really important year because we are seeing some definite changes. At least I know on Long Island, we've got multiple representatives deciding not to run, especially last minute. and we do have to hold their feet to the fire, as Moses said. So please, think about how you want to help with this. This is a huge campaign that needs to keep going, as Mike said. It's not just tomorrow, it's going to be next year and the year after, because if we want New York to be the best place for us to live, we have to make it the best place to live. So that's how we do this. With that, Dana's putting some links, so please sign up. I've got a quick announcement from Our Revolution, since we are an Our Revolution organization. New York Progressive Action Network and Our Revolution recently endorsed Jumaane Williams for governor, because we do believe that he would work for us in this way. If anyone is interested in joining a petition training on this, and please click on that link. For next week on the 24th, we will have petition training. It's easy. It's just knocking doors and getting signatures, but there is some caveats on how to do that appropriately. So we would appreciate anybody who is interested in electing the most progressive governor. We need one. It's been a long time since we've had one, even though Cuomo has said he was progressive. I find that hard to believe. And so I'm going to push that if you can, please join us on the 24th for petition training for Jumaane Williams. Even though Melanie's not here, she had to jump off for another call. Melanie is also, it was great working with her. She really understands this policy. If you live on Long Island, I hope you'll check out her campaign. And even if you don't, she will do a lot for New York as the next congressional representative for CD3. So huge supporter of her. We've endorsed her. So I am looking forward to see her in DC working for us and all the working and middle class. So I wanted to thank everybody tonight. Dana and Erica, thank you for giving us this presentation. I've been in your shoes, and I know it's a lot of information to remember and to put out there. And I want to thank Mike for coming in and giving us that update and some more perspective on this, and everyone else that joined us tonight. I really appreciate you being here. Zoom makes it a wonderful opportunity for us to do this statewide, to get the message out as to many people as possible. Share the message about Invest Our New York, and we will hopefully see you next week and on the Saturday morning call. Okay? Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.